Before conservative firebrand Charlie Kirk was assassinated, I was exploring media coverage of another violent killing for you. For this show, I saw so clearly what I needed to tell you all about how the media keeps missing one of its most important roles in covering homicides. Quite possibly its single most important role. Inside news agencies, most people don't even realize this. They're so used to ignoring this journalistic responsibility that they just go into predictable patterns that get us nowhere. Then, in the wake of Charlie Kirk being shot, the same problem went into overdrive. I'll explain coming up. It boils down to a key question of whether we're going to move forward as a society or not. To understand all this, we're going to take a look at a Ukrainian refugee who was killed on light rail in North Carolina. Also, the attempted assassination of author Salman Rushdie when he was speaking on a stage, and the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. No, it's not about comparing individuals. You'll hear why this is significant. Also today, a line that people use in the news all the time when talking about violence and mental health. It does not mean what journalists seem to think it means, and it doesn't tackle the important questions. Plus, an American news network fired an analyst. You'll hear context coming up and why it shows a larger problem in the news. And the BBC is trying to run cover for a student leader at Oxford who celebrated Kirk's assassination. Also, when stars preach hatred at the Emmys, they are fueling a problem that increases political violence in America. And where are these stars getting their false talking points? All that is coming up today on They Stand Corrected. Hello and welcome. So great to have you here. I am Josh Lebs, and this is my podcast, They Stand Corrected, which fact-checks the news. You can learn a lot about me at my website, my 10 years on NPR, 10 years at CNN, where I spent time as lead on-air fact-checker and doing lots of work online as well. Throughout all that time and ever since, I have seen so clearly that the media needs fact-checking because the media gets and does so much wrong. You deserve better. We all deserve better. This show is about making that happen. There isn't a lot to piece through given what's been happening in recent days, so I'm going to jump right into this. Rising political violence. There is only one sensible way to respond to Charlie Kirk's killing. The only way to respond is with horror and to be heartbroken for his family. Disagree with things he has said all you want. Just like a lot of people, he has said some good things and some not good things. He has definitely said some vile things about certain groups of people. But obviously, the key to responding is speech. In the wake of his killing, there has been endless talk in the media about political violence in America. There's some facts that no one seems to be pointing out, so let's talk about those. First, the rate of gun homicides in general in America has gone down in the past couple of years. The number went way up during COVID, and it's been going down each year since 2021. That's true in terms of overall numbers and also per capita numbers. Anyway, while those have been going down, political violence does seem to be increasing. So when the media says that, in the big picture, that's true. There isn't a single clear way to calculate that, though. There are different definitions of what counts. For example, is a hate crime political or not? If it was inspired by something a politician said, does that make it political violence? If it was inspired by a speaker, maybe a podcaster whom a politician loves, does that make it political violence? I'm not referring to Charlie Kirk there. I'm just saying the definition of political violence is more complicated than the media is letting on. But in the big picture, people who follow this stuff say, yes, political violence is on the rise in America. And it's important to make this clear. It is happening on all sides. In June, a Democrat state lawmaker in Minnesota and her husband were killed, and another Democrat and his wife were wounded when a gunman went after them. The shooter had a list of Democrats he was going after. He had all these plans, and authorities there described it as the stuff of nightmares. Just the day before Charlie Kirk was killed, CBS News had this report up on its website from CBS Minnesota.
Today, House Democrats have a new leader. He takes the job 3 months after the tragic loss of Melissa Hortman in a political assassination.
In a twist that is so America 2025, that new leader has the task of helping organize a special session in the wake of the school shooting in Minneapolis, which I discussed a couple episodes ago. That shooter had political messages on his weapon. But there have been a bunch of incidents. In Pennsylvania, Governor Josh Shapiro, a Democrat, his house was firebombed on Passover. He's Jewish, so that's relevant. By someone who had been spouting anti-Israel messages. That's one of many acts of political violence coming from that camp. And there were 2 assassination attempts on Trump last year. So political violence is increasing. And there is a measurement that you probably have not heard about in the news, but that puts this in context. Support for violence in America. There is a group that conducts surveys about this frequently and with methodologies that make sense, so there's reason to trust them. The Chicago Project on Security and Threats. The head of it, Robert Pape, wrote an op-ed about it in June for the New York Times, read on their website by an AI voice.
Our May survey was the most worrisome yet. About 40% of Democrats supported the use of force to remove Mr. Trump from the presidency, and about 25% of Republicans supported the use of the military to stop protests against Mr. Trump's agenda. These numbers more than doubled since last fall.
Clearly, something has to be done about this. What? This is where we should be looking to the media for facts and context. What solutions are there? What solutions work? We're not getting that. AI is not trustworthy for many fact-checking things, but it is good at amalgamating a lot of information. I asked a couple of AI tools what the reporting has been about. Have any of the big national news agencies been talking about solutions to this stuff? And the tools told me, nope. What we're getting is instead, of course, lots of political coverage and the latest on the investigation, which is important, but the media is not focusing on what to do. We're getting tons of finger pointing. This representative has now said this. This person is blaming this group. So the media is failing to look for solutions on this, but not just on what do we do about political violence. Even in more immediate and concrete ways, the media is not looking for solutions. This is where the specifics of Charlie Kirk's killing come into play. According to current reporting, it was a single shot from 200 yards away. What the actual hell? This is not something that, in general, speakers, even controversial speakers, are supposed to have to think about. Yes, controversial speakers face security threats. There's Salman Rushdie, the author who has long had this fatwa against him from Iran. It goes back decades. The current leadership in Iran reaffirmed it and increased monetary rewards for killing him several years ago for daring to write a book that they didn't like. Rushdie was stabbed a few years ago at a place called the Chautauqua Institute. I spoke there, actually. Anyway, here he is discussing it on NPR.
And this man got up out of the audience and came towards the stage. There's a few steps up, and then he started sprinting. He just sprinted up the steps and came at me. And I immediately thought, oh, it's actually happening.
He was stabbed in the eye and elsewhere. He was blinded in one eye and has other injuries.
I thought he hit me. I never saw the knife. I didn't realize that there was a weapon in his hand until I saw the blood coming out.
How many times did he stab you?
I've been trying to work it out. I mean, I think it's at least 12. It might be 13 or 14. I keep trying to count them and I lose count.
As horrific as that is, the idea of being confronted by an attacker who comes right up, that is something more imaginable. Or a gunman in the crowd who comes close, and hopefully you have security people looking out for that. But a speaker killed by a single shot 200 yards away, apparently from a rooftop? I wrote about this in my newsletter. Is that where we are now? For public events, do we need Secret Service level security? For comparison, by the way, Martin Luther King Jr. was shot on the balcony of the Lorraine Motel in 1968. He was shot from 207 feet away. So this is like triple the distance. No, I'm not comparing any two people, just trying to help you imagine what we're talking about. Do we have to scope out the roofs of buildings for public events? Because in that case, even some indoor spaces could be dangerous if there's a high window where someone on a nearby rooftop can see through. What do we need to avoid this? We need answers. We're not even getting those questions from the media, let alone any answers. Instead, we're getting more and more politics. That is clear not only in covering what appears to be a political assassination of Charlie Kirk, it also happened when covering what does not appear to be a political killing, a young woman who was stabbed in Charlotte, North Carolina. The media's addiction to repeating and playing into political battles prevents it from even looking for solutions in a local crime that involves mental health. That's coming up. There is a 3-step dance the media uses to spread lies. In the newsletter, I break down what those 3 steps are so you can recognize what's happening every time you see it. It's a performance that swings public opinion and radicalizes people. That is just one of the many things you'll learn in the newsletter. It's designed to complement this show, giving you facts, sources, videos, photos, and more. Unlike the media, I don't expect you to take my word for anything. The newsletter is also where people send in their ideas and requests for topics to cover on this show. And there's another feature. Sometimes you probably hear someone say something that you know is false because you heard about it here, and you want to find where that was so you can send them a link. Well, here's how it works. When you go to the main page of the newsletter, you can type in any topic or the name of a news agency, just about anything, and it will show you where I have addressed that topic. It will bring you to the facts, which you can then share. I also have email addresses for major news sites and instructions for you to send messages to the leaders so you can let them know what they're doing wrong. The newsletter is free, but this show relies on your support, and the best way to support the show is to become a paid subscriber to the newsletter. When you do that, I reward you with exclusive content, I read messages from you on the show, and I help you save lots of money by accessing major news sites for free legally. To find the newsletter, check out the show notes or my website, joshlebs.com. You'll see a direct link. The newsletter is on a platform called Substack. If you're already on Substack, just look me up by name or by the title. They stand corrected. Thank you. A young woman, a refugee from Ukraine, Irina Zarutska, was killed out of nowhere by a guy with mental illness, diagnosed schizophrenia. It took place on a train, light rail, in Charlotte, North Carolina. Like the Charlie Kirk killing, this one also has video showing it just happening suddenly. I do not recommend that you look at either of these videos. It does not help you understand the story any better. Once the video of this one got out, it became big political fodder. It is relevant for you to know that this young woman was white, the killer is black. Some people on the right, including Charlie Kirk, said the media was burying the story because it did not match their preferred narrative. People on the left said people on the right are only playing up this one local killing because it does match their political narrative. And then people on the right were responding, well, you turned other local killings into big national stories. Anyway, you've probably heard that. That's the political back and forth on this horrible, senseless killing. My focus is on what the media does. I went looking at the kind of coverage people are getting, and it's the same problem, addiction to politics. On CNN alone, as soon as I looked, I saw 3 different panel discussions with only political talking heads discussing this case. Here's a few clips from one of them. Here's one speaker talking about the assailant.
The man who committed this crime was out on cashless bail, which has been a crusade of the political left. He also has a repeat offender, career criminal. 14 times he was arrested. His mother tried to have him involuntarily committed because he's schizophrenic.
Here's someone else later in that same discussion.
I think this is a big challenge that we have. Would you have felt better if there had been cash bail and the mom had come and put down $1,000 to let him out? It's not about cashless bail or no cashless bail.
Okay, so far you've learned that cash bail either is or is not somehow relevant in this story. A bunch of speakers said the real problem is that our society does not know how to deal with people who have mental illnesses. Everyone had an opinion on that. Here's just one example of the remarks along the way.
We don't know if the person's going to be violent or not violent. And unfortunately, we don't have services that they used to have for mentally ill people in terms of dealing with them.
What services? Which ones? What do we need? Watch all of this and the other discussions with political talking heads weighing in on something they have no knowledge or expertise about, and you end up exactly where you started, with no clue about what needs to be done. I'll tell you, I was briefly hopeful when I saw that PBS interviewed a woman who has expertise about mental health in America. Her name is Alyssa Roth. She's an author. But unfortunately, they didn't provide any details either that would point you to solutions. Here's a clip from that.
There are a growing number of cities and states that, faced with incidents like this, are turning to what's called involuntary commitment. How good of a solution is that?
In the very short term, it can be useful. But we obviously also don't want a society where we're locking people up indefinitely because they have mental illness. So there needs to be a larger system, a larger mental health care system that's actually dealing with the underlying problems and that's helping continue that mental health care once the person is released from that involuntary commitment.
What should that system look like? What would it be? How would it operate? If you don't want help with your mental health, but you need it, and you are released from involuntary commitment, even under her description, and you're dangerous, then what? Somebody tell us potential solutions, how they work, what they look like, how some places have achieved improvements, all that. If this was part of the true north for journalists, they would book people and do interviews and have discussions that are geared toward that set of facts, the facts about what has worked in different places and how and why. Potential solutions that we can come together around. One more note from this interview. Often in the news, you hear lines like this, which the PBS host said leading into this discussion.
We should say at the outset that the data show that people suffering from mental illness are much more likely to be victims of violence than perpetrators of it.
I understand why people feel the need to say this. They don't want to exacerbate bigotry against people over mental health. But that line that you hear all the time doesn't mean much. Of course, people with mental illness are more likely to be victims than perpetrators. All people are more likely to be victims than perpetrators. Everybody. I was going to say everybody except criminals, but no, even criminals are more likely to be victims than perpetrators because perpetrators often have multiple victims. So just statistically, everybody's more likely to be a victim than a perpetrator. So that doesn't tell you anything about the role of mental health in this stuff. What we should be told is that the best available research shows that, for example, in this case, people with schizophrenia are more likely than average to be perpetrators of violence, even though the overwhelming majority never engage in any violence. But it can be a factor leading to violence. It can also lead people to drug addiction, which leads to violence. So we need solutions. There has been a ton of coverage of this tragic killing in North Carolina and the political ramifications of how it's being used. In fact, Charlie Kirk was often cited in those discussions before he was killed because of what he had said about that incident. President Trump has weighed in. The politics we know, but at the end of it, what can anyone do to help avoid something like this in the future? What works? We need the news media on this more than ever. Since political battles have overtaken so much streaming and podcasting, like with what Charlie Kirk did, we really don't need that from the news media anymore. Here's a bunch of people with political perspectives who are going to tell you their thoughts on it. Why? You're not helping. News is supposed to be new, and when everybody has political voices on social media, everywhere, saying their opinions about everything, you're not even offering anything new by having people do it on your news network. I mentioned this once in an episode last year. It's not up to the media to solve society's problems, aside from the problem of people not having information. That is the role of the media. But it's not up to the media to solve problems like this. It is up to the media to report fully on the topics they cover. And potential solutions are always part of the story. Shine a light on them. Stop ignoring them. That is actionable information. It's part of what some people have called news you can use. Coming up, I will try to fill in some of these gaps a little myself. Do you remember the little engine that could? Let's talk about that for a second. The dangerous polarization taking over our society is being fueled by the media. And there's a reason for that. The market rewards it. These days, if you join a big lie of the right or the left, it's like you are put on a bullet train that speeds to numeric success. this show goes against the market. And so it is a much tougher, harder path to grow this show. We need your support to grow this movement for truth, to help fuel this train up the hill. Here are things you can do. Yes, you can become a paid subscriber to the newsletter. That's helpful. Also, there are free things you can do. Rate and review this show on the platforms, wherever you're listening to it now. Everyone who does that makes a huge difference because that's how those algorithms work. Tell individuals about this show. Contact someone you know and say, I think you specifically would find this episode interesting, and here's why. You can also sponsor episodes and tell sponsors about the episodes. You can find out all this information in the show notes and at my website, joshlebs.com. Let's root for truth so our society can come together. And let's prove to the market that you don't have to join a big lie to succeed. With your help, we can get there. Thank you. MSNBC fired its analyst Matthew Dowd on the day of Charlie Kirk's shooting, something that Dowd said on MSNBC made the rounds on social media. Here's a clip.
He's been one of the most divisive, especially divisive younger figures in this, who is constantly sort of pushing this sort of hate speech or sort of aimed at certain groups. I always go back to hateful thoughts lead to hateful words, which then lead to hateful actions. And I think that's the environment we're in, that people just, you can't stop with these sort of awful thoughts you have and then saying these awful words and not expect awful actions to take place.
Out of context, that sounds like an obviously misguided thing to say. But in context, things do change. Dowd points out that when he said that, he was only referring to a gunshot at all, and that this was before the network knew that Charlie Kirk was killed. In that segment, he did say, we don't know if this was a supporter shooting their gun off in celebration. He has written about the moment and explained it in his own words. And how people feel about what he said there, that's subjective. But there are some facts that have not been mentioned in the coverage. One is that he was the chief strategist for Bush Cheney in 2004. He later went back to being a Democrat, so his political career has straddled both parties. It's not as simple as crazy liberals being crazy, which is how some media covered it. In a case like this, after some time, it's quite possible that he will become an analyst again somewhere, and that in the meantime, MSNBC just wanted to avoid the headache of people up in arms over what he said. But here's what I want you to know about all this. When there is a gunshot at an event, and that's all you know, it does not make sense to rush to bring in political analysts. That speaks directly to the problem I've been talking about. Why would they possibly pontificate on something when they don't know what the thing is? How about if in moments like that, the news, yes, including a network like MSNBC, since that is the 24/7 operation of NBC News, how about if they focus on what's known and what's not known? And if they need to fill time, how about this? Bring in analysts who have expertise on security. Ask them things like, what kinds of security are usually in place at public events like this? Are people able to bring in weapons at events like this? When people go to public events, can they generally be hopeful that there is security in place? That at least could be potentially helpful. There are things you can talk about and give people information about in these moments. I had times on CNN when I just had to keep the conversation going by talking about what we know and what we don't know. And these are things you can absolutely do without bringing in people to inject political analysis before they have a thing to analyze. That is just breeding problems like this. Meanwhile, there are people, especially on college campuses, who heard exactly what happened, that Charlie Kirk was killed, and rushed to celebrate it, which is so depraved. I wrote about this in the newsletter. Partisan media and people online do this thing all the time, in which they find the craziest people from the other political side and highlight them and say this person represents that whole side. So, extremists on the far right, they say that's the entire conservative movement. Extremists on the left, they say that's the entire liberal movement. But in this case, as you heard earlier, there is widespread support for political violence. And here's an example of someone who openly celebrated this. At Oxford, one of the most esteemed universities in the world, there is something called the Oxford Union. I have mentioned that before. I did a debate there. It's the number one place in the world to do debates. It's supposed to be all about speech rather than violence. Well, the student who is the incoming president of that organization celebrated Charlie Kirk's death. And we live at a time in which people have no qualms about doing so publicly. He wrote, quote, Charlie Kirk got shot, let's effing go. And he wrote, Charlie Kirk got shot, LOOOL, which is a long way of saying laughing out loud, because apparently just one O was not enough to express the joy he felt at Charlie Kirk being killed. This is so sick. As soon as his comments were exposed and he realized there was a possibility that maybe he could face consequences, although that's very unlikely these days, the way Oxford is, this young man tried to undo it. He claimed that he had reacted impulsively and that his comments did not reflect his values. Right. Newsflash, your impulsive comments reflect your values. Your pulling them back later on reflects your desire to hide your values. The BBC is, of course, trying to run interference for him, trying to cover for him. They have a headline now that is all about this young man being, quote, racially abused for his posts, because they have to turn him into a victim right away. On this show, I have talked about the dangers of anti-democratic movements on the far right and the far left, the support for right-wing Christian nationalist fascism on the right, and the support for Islamist fascism on the left. Earlier, I played for you a clip from an op-ed by an expert who tracks political violence. His name is Robert Pape. Well, immediately after what I played earlier, literally starting with the next sentence, here is what he said.
Our research has found that support for political violence is linked to seemingly unrelated grievances. In April 2023, my organization and the Anti-Defamation League conducted a survey to examine the overlap of support for political violence and anti-Semitism in the United States. Among Americans who expressed strong support for anti-Jewish tropes, there was significantly more support for the use of force in the service of both right-leaning and left-leaning causes. This may help explain the intensification of political violence today, where violence against the Trump administration's agenda, against the agendas of Democratic leaders, and in the service of anti-Semitism, seem to fuel one another.
Short version, as people become more anti-Semitic on the left and the right, they also become more supportive of political violence. It is a vicious circle between those two things. This, sadly, makes sense. It's something that those of us who follow history know well. Hate movements always need scapegoats to blame, always. And the easiest group to choose is the one that remains a minority in the world because it doesn't proselytize. That is the people of Israel, Am Yisrael, the people of Judea, known in this country as Jews. The more anti-Semitic people get, the more dangerous any society becomes for everyone. That is context for what's going on around the world, context for what's going on in America, and context for what happened at the Emmys. Hopefully you're like me and you don't care what happens at the Emmys in general. But the media did, of course, rush to cover these two things I'll tell you about here. One is this woman who won an Emmy. Her name is Hannah Einbinder. In her speech, she screamed "Free Palestine," and then in her remarks afterward, she slammed Israel as an ethno-nationalist state. She is so clueless. Fact, nations all over the world, including Arab nations, are ethno-nationalist states by definition. So is the state that Hamas and other Palestinian groups are demanding. She literally used her speech to support an ethno-nationalist state and then slammed Israel for being one. When something is okay for everyone else, but horrible if Jews do it, that is by definition anti-Semitic. Yes, even if the person saying it is Jewish as she is. Also, this other actor, Javier Bardem, pushed the genocide libel. He cited as his source a debunked group of alleged scholars who are not, in reality, scholars. As I've reported previously, they are a group that any person can join for $30. And the vast majority of that group didn't even take part in the decision to accuse Israel of genocide. Here's what's most important about that for this show. Where do these entertainment people and others get their talking points? Where do they get radicalized? In the media. The media that keeps pushing politics and lies without solutions. The the media that keeps treating anti-Semitism as being a worse problem on the other side and one that they can define or explain their way out of on their side. Where do solutions exist? I'm just one person. I cannot fill in all the massive gaps for the media myself. But I'm looking. I've been going through research to see what's clear and not clear. And I'm going to bring you what I find. Also, if you know experts, real experts who have answers, solutions, let me know, along with your other feedback. As always, there are two great ways to reach me. The best is through the newsletter, and the second is through a form at my website, available to anyone. You'll see. Just check it out. JoshLebs.com, JoshLevs.com. As always, thank you so much for listening. I will see you next week.